about the project again. We're excited to be here to talk, just give you an update where we're at, what we know today, and kind of what the next few months and years looks like. So my name is Jeremy Keene. I'm the Director for Public Works Mobility. I have a number of other city staff here today who've been helping me get this project rolling. As I'm sure you all know, we did receive the RAISE grant that we applied for back in February, and we were surprised that we heard about that grant at the end of June. So it was actually ahead of schedule, and we have been working over the summer to sort of lay out a plan for what that's going to look like going forward. And today is kind of our first opportunity to talk to you about what that looks like. I think one of the really important things, that you're all here, that you're showing up to talk about it. I was over at the League of Cities and Towns conference last week in Helena, and one of the speakers talked about civic engagement, and he just said, throughout the country, the way that people react or feel about engaging with government right now is almost universally frustrated, angry, unheard, and I think that isn't okay. We need to make sure that government is listening, and that when you show up and talk, you feel heard, you feel like the process works for you, and that we're all achieving good outcomes. And I think at the local government level, we have the best ability to do that. And we started out back in February with kind of that same problem of anger and frustration. There were a lot of folks that really weren't familiar with the project and felt like it was moving too fast. We had a great meeting in May. We had a series of smaller meetings and then a great meeting at the Wilma that I think everybody showed up, and we had a civil dialogue. Both sides listened to each other. I think we made a lot of progress, and I think it really carried the day for getting this grant. We showed the folks in DC that we can work together as a community to make good projects work. And I just think that was important for us getting the grant. It's important for us to build off that base going forward as we start to implement this project. It's not an easy project, and it's not something that we're all going to agree on in this room, but I think where we ended up back in May was that there's opportunities here that are good for the city of Missoula, that are good for downtown, and we can find common ground on a lot of things. So I want to just carry that forward as we move into the next phase of the project. So here's what I'll talk about today. Just a quick overview, timeline, view of our key interests. We're starting the process of forming an advisory committee, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that today, about how we're going to do that, and then a brief update on the parking study. So just as a quick reminder, the federal grant that we put together includes 4 different projects. It's the front and main two-way conversion. It's the Higgins corridor from Broadway all the way down to Brooks. It's a series of connections down to the Riverfront Trail and some widening and improvements to the trail system, including a new ADA ramp down from the bridge to Karis Park. And then finally, an overall downtown signal optimization project that will retime and improve the signals in downtown to help with traffic circulation. So all of these things lined up to be a really good fit for the RAISE grant. It ticked a lot of the boxes that they were looking for, and I think that was a big part of why we were successful. So what we're setting out to do with this project is really focus on safer streets for all different users, improving access and circulation downtown. We want to make it easier to get in and out of downtown, to access the parking structures, to find parking, to get to businesses. Really working on that inviting streetscape. If you remember, we talked a lot about all the investment that's been happening in downtown, and we haven't kept up with our public infrastructure. So this is a great opportunity to bring some of that up to a modern standard, better streetlights, new traffic signals, repaving, all of those things that really help with the downtown aesthetic. And at the end of the day, we really want to support economic health and investment in downtown. So this is kind of where we've been over the last few years. We did learn about the grant in end of June, and now here we are in October. So concurrent with that, we've been working on a parking study. The Missoula Parking Commission set out to study parking in downtown and the hip strip area, and they are in the process now of preparing a final report and getting recommendations to the Parking Commission for how parking can be better managed and where we can create additional parking in and around the downtown. So going forward, our timeline is a little bit more uncertain, so this is still pretty general, but we anticipate getting a grant agreement done in the spring of 2024. Right now, we're hearing that it's 6 to 9 months to do these grant agreements, so they all end up on the desk of the Office of the Secretary, and it's like 2 people reviewing 1,000 grants, so we got to get in line, and we're making good progress on getting that grant agreement put together and submitted so that we can get in the queue as soon as we can. But we don't know the exact timeline. So when exactly we start is a little bit of an unknown. So we're doing some things now that we can do before we have that formal grant agreement, which gives us the ability to start spending the money. Once we get started, preliminary and final design are going to be 2 important steps. Some of the project elements are further along than others. So we've done a lot of design work, engineering work on the front and main conversion. That's at a 70% or so design level that is much further along than the projects like Higgins or the ADA ramp connection down to the park or the signal study. So, so we need to catch some of those projects up, and then we also need to do some final design tweaking and revisiting of the different concepts on the front and main project to make sure that we really have it dialed in and that it's going to work as well as it possibly can. Important in all of that, with the federal money, is this NEPA process. So NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. And what that requires is when you spend federal money, you have to evaluate all of the project impacts, identify mitigation where necessary, and have a public process. So this will be part of that process, and it gives us the opportunity to go back and revisit the various concepts that we have in the project and make sure that we're really getting the best possible results. So that'll include things like finishing the analysis of parking and looking at where we can do parking mitigation, truck circulation, figuring out how we get larger trucks in and out of downtown for deliveries, emergency services, where and how they can access and make sure that we're providing good fire protection for buildings in the downtown. So that'll be an opportunity for public involvement and for an advisory committee to really have an important role in shaping the project. So all of this kind of lines up for a 2026 construction start. We'll take a look at how the project is phased and whether it makes sense to try to kick some projects out sooner and get those started, or how we want to bite off the different pieces of the work. But phasing is going to be an important part. We obviously can't do all of that work at once. We're going to need to continue to maintain traffic and maintain good access to downtown while we're doing construction. So we'll have to pick some manageable pieces to do that work and construct it over several seasons. So some of the key interests, just looking back to our meeting in May and knowing that these are the things that we need to work on as we go forward with the design. Continuing to prioritize safety for all the different users. We want people to feel safe and be safe when they're in downtown. It doesn't matter how you get there, how you move around. All those different uses need to be carefully considered and make sure that we have safe facilities for different types of users. So things like adding turn lanes, adding separated facilities for bikes, providing better visibility and shorter crossing distances for pedestrians, improving our street lighting, all those go into safety. We'll also work to mitigate parking, and that's with both management strategies and with replacement of parking where we lose some on-street parking spaces. Working on balancing the use of cars and trucks in downtown with all of the other needs. So we know that there's a lot of different competing interests, and we need to find a good balance between car and truck circulation, emergency access, all those things. So we'll be looking at the two-way circulation plan for front and main, how that can improve access, adding those turn lanes, the new signals, the new signal in particular at Madison and Front will really help with access in and out of downtown, and then making sure that all of our signals are modernized and working as efficiently as they can. Finally, managing construction impacts. We think there's a couple of pieces of this. I already mentioned a phasing plan and figuring out good ways to move through the downtown as we do this project, but also a good communication plan. We want to really make sure that people know that downtown is still open and available and that people can come down there during construction, and so we want to have good communications, a good strategy on how we communicate with the general public about downtown and what's happening. Okay, so advisory committee. I think before I go on to this, any questions about the project in general? And yes, sir.
I think that it would be good to be on the timeline, to be more lucid about when this really started, which really was way back in the greater downtown master planning process. That these public engagements have been going on for over a decade, and it was very, very open and well-attended process. And particularly, I remember the front main conversion being one of the products of that.
Yeah.
So just saying this started just like a couple years ago is not really, this is a community conversation that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's a great point. I worked on the first downtown feasibility study for two-way conversion of Front and Main, and I think it was 2004. So it has been a long time. A lot of planning and a lot of work has gone into the point where we are today, and it's one of the reasons that we were successful with that grant, because we'd had that background and a lot of solid public involvement and planning that went into it. So it's not a new project, but this is, I think we're at a point where we've really moved into the implementation phase of a lot of our planning. Anything else? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the advisory committee, and then Jenny Tribe, who helped us with our meeting back in May, is going to give us a little bit more information about how we do this. What we're envisioning is a citizens advisory committee that is made up of 10 to 15 people that represent the different interests in the project. And interests you can kind of think about as, who cares about the project and why, and we want to identify what are all the different interests in the project to form a good committee. Meeting monthly or bi-monthly over the next 2 to 3 years, so it's a group that will stick with the project from our early preliminary design phase all the way through construction and help us navigate all of those things. And it'll be by application, and we anticipate having applications ready to go in January of 24, so we'll get that started as soon as we can. So roles and expectations for the advisory committee. We want thoughtful input and feedback on the design, on phasing, on project impacts, and the way we do public outreach. We expect folks on the committee to work collaboratively within the committee and to address all interests. So you may come with an interest to the committee, but we have to recognize that we're trying to get to the best place for all the different interests that are involved. Help us recognize our blind spots and gaps. What don't we know? And how do we make sure that we're addressing all of the possible interests that are affected by the project? And finally, advise the project leadership team on specific aspects of the project and provide recommendations. So it really is it's everything from looking at design plans to looking at the way we communicate with the public and the way we can do a better job of marketing downtown during construction. So this is a very simplified version of the decision process that's involved with this. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen with this. We have Federal Highways, who's administering the grant that we got. We have the Montana Department of Transportation. We're working on several of their routes. We have our city council that approves all of the funding and contracts that the city administers. So all of that runs through our mayor and our project leadership team. So the project leadership team is a group that we've formed just in the last few months of department heads. So myself with the Public Works Department, Donna Gockler with the Parks Department, Ellen Buchanan with the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, and our Parking Commissioner. And we just had a change of leadership with Parking Commission. Ian Ortlieb has left the city, and so Tiffany Brander is here today as an interim fill-in. Thank you, Tiffany. So we'll have a new Parking Commissioner, but that's an important piece of the project as well. And so along with several staff members, the project leadership team is really where a lot of the project level decisions will be made, and then in consultation with our mayor and ultimately approvals from the more formal bodies with Federal Highways and MDT. Down here at the bottom, this three-tiered input system is really important. So the Citizens Advisory Committee, the Downtown SAM Advisory Committee that's representing the interest in the project is really an important piece of feeding into the project leadership team's decision-making, but we'll also have general public outreach and a technical advisory committee made up of staff. So staff from both the city, MDT, Mountain Line, other agencies that are involved in this project and can provide technical information. So that kind of gives us kind of multiple ways to collect information and consider it. We want to make sure that the advisory committee is really citizen-driven, that it's really a group of people that are stakeholders and affected by the project, that are providing input that's different than a room full of engineers or planners that come from a different perspective on things. So I'm going to invite Jenny to come up and talk about how we actually go about forming an advisory committee and the different interests that we've identified so far. Tim?
I thought interim fill-in was an interesting phrase for a parking person. So, some of you I connected with when we did the meeting in the Wilma, and my job here this morning as the potential advisor or facilitator for the advisory committee is to just very quickly give you an overview of how that might work. Just a few minutes, and then we'll see if we have any questions. So, you know, this business about interests that's up here, interests are what really define the problem. This is not a sappy kind of process where a bunch of people are going to come together and they're going to come to consensus and agreement and basically have no power except that you've come together as 14 or 15 people who have some advice for the city. And so this advisory committee is going to be based on looking first at what are the target interest groups up here who would care and about what. So this is not about I like parking and you don't like parking, and so how do we sort that out? Interests are about what's behind why I like parking or why I don't want parking. And so what we did is go through and sort of identify what those target interests would be. It isn't a specific person, it's what do they care about. And that's not about feelings, it goes closest to the bone, and many times it has to do with how you make a living. Whether you're a business or, let's say I'm a person with disabilities, how do I get around downtown? If I'm employed down there, if I happen to live downtown, how is that going to interfere with my livability, my affordability, etc.? So we looked at these target groups. And in addition to looking at them, we said, who would really want to be at the table in the discussion? And that's not saying whether Bill would want to be at the table himself, but what interests are represented there. So we would like someone to be at the table like them. So we looked at downtown businesses, non-motorized mobility. You can see that Harry, Mary, and Barry's names aren't up here. They're actually the interests that matter. Motorized users, transit users, people that take the bus, take an Uber, a taxi. Do they still have taxis? I don't know how old I am. Downtown property owners, downtown users and events. I've never taken an Uber or even called one, and I wouldn't know how to do it. Downtown residents, downtown employees, persons with downtown visitors, students. What kind of student? Is that a college student? Is it a teacher who brings first graders downtown? It's all of those things. Freight and delivery people. Think about port towns in Washington where it's really hard to get down the street because all the delivery parks right down the middle of the street no matter what. So, but those folks have a real interest in how that's going to be laid out. Realtors, representative associations, that's chamber, that's downtown association. That could be a whole bunch of different groups. City taxpayers and voters, local indigenous history and values, people living in Missoula, Missoula County, unhoused and marginally housed people. You can see that some of these go to sort of a broader societal interest that we're going to call community interest. So what Jeremy and Macy and Aaron and Ellen and Donna and those folks are trying to do here is put together a group of people who could have civil and reasonable discussion about different chunks of the process. It's not about if we're gonna do it, it's how we're gonna do it. You know, there are folks in the room that probably would still be at the place of if, but the city's looking at how we're gonna do it. So let's say you've got a chunk related to finalizing some design things. Well, one of the things that would be important is not, you like a design and I like a design and then we argue about it. Instead, I would say, so what do you need out of this? And you would say, what do you need out of this? And this is not about nice, never. This is about absolute, what would it mean to you if you lose on this? What would it mean to my business? What would it mean to my job? What it would mean to my ego? What it would mean to my reputation? All those kinds of things. And so, once we find that out, I'm gonna have a lot more power in the thing if you care in some mutuality way about what's important to me and vice versa. It's not about compromise. It's about how do we build the thing so that we really try to honor what happens. So when I think, Nick, for example, of the things that you might bring to the table, if you were part of an advisory group, you might bring 4 different interests to the table. You don't have one person for each one of these. There might be somebody that could represent more than one. So the way this process is going to work is that the city's going to put out a call for applications. And so I was going to ask you this morning quickly, what kind of criteria should be used other than making sure that these kinds of interests, not person for everyone, but what these interests are represented at the table. What kind of criteria should the city use in its call for, please?
Question, do you have to be a city resident to be on this committee?
Great question. Answer is no. Well, look what we have up here. People living in Missoula County. Now, if you live in Bozeman, maybe, you know, you might not, they might pick somebody other than if you live in Bozeman. But great question. Other questions?
How about availability? Show up at meetings.
Ooh, perfect criteria. So if you cannot say, now remember he said 2 to 3 years? Well, you know, I'm gonna be 80 real soon. I'm not sure I'll still be the facilitator in 3 years. So availability is a critical one because it means that people, so when Fish, Wildlife and Parks does this or a company does this, they ask people if they would commit pretty much to meeting at least 4 times a year, maybe more like every 2 months in different phases. There might be some spaces in between. Can you commit to doing it most of the time over the next 2 to 3 years? Now, we gotta be reasonable here, like I just said. You know, if you're gonna move or you're only here temporarily or whatever, but you can't just say, I would like to apply and then say, well, once in a while I show up. It's not like a public meeting. This is not just a mutuality to get to understanding each other's interests. It's a mutuality of commitment to try to give the very best advice you can to the city on what they should do on this particular design element, or how bicycles should be treated, or where parking should occur, or whatever. This will be working on real things, not on touchy-feely. This will be working on real pieces of what's going to happen as the project goes forward. Please, criteria.
Yeah, for touchy-feely, is this kind of a touchy-feely thing for business owners, building owners that were involved in it, or, you know, are we gonna have any real say? Is anything gonna be accommodated for, say, like, hey, this is gonna impact my business directly? We kind of do it slightly different, is that gonna be accommodated, or is this just like a feel good thing for you guys?
So I've been at my company 33 years. I hate feeling good.
Yeah.
And I have 7 children, and they know I hate. So I think that the answer to your question is really mixed.
Sure.
First of all, an advisory group has no power.
Yeah.
You're advisory. The city cannot give their power away illegally. I mean, legally. They just can't. If you're looking at NEPA, you have to look at the social, economic, engineering, resource. You have to look at all of those concerns as well. So that's the first thing. If you are applying for the committee and you think you're going to be able to tell the city exactly what they need to do.
Not tell, but just have like say, you know, like have a suggestion that's being actually taken seriously as opposed to like, oh, that's nice, but we're gonna actually take your block, like, hey, my parents own a separate business that's gonna actually do all its parking downtown, you know, it's dreadful. Doesn't affect me,
you here. It's in his parents' interest to
Have a viable business.
remain viable in their business, absolutely. There might be 4 different ways to do that.
Yeah, my business isn't affected, like.
I'm just
I don't-
using it as
I
a-
don't, I don't see it as like a thing where I'm gonna be on the committee or fellow business owners, building owners are gonna be on the committee and have a realistic say in like, hey, my property tax bill goes up $500 a month a year, every year to support these programs that all things that don't really benefit me. So I don't really have a say in how I'm spending my money, you know, the money that I make, you know, supporting the community with a viable business.
So the answer to the question about the advisory committee is, the advisory committee probably isn't gonna be able to do anything about property taxes.
Yeah.
They probably, however, if you look up here at the business of people who have owned downtown property, whether it's you or your folks or whatever, we're talking hypothetically, but if that's the case, then this group has to be able to look at, is the value of downtown property gonna go up because of this, or is it gonna go down significantly? You know, it may be that a downtown property owner ends up with the value of their property higher, but then think about what happens to the resident who rents that property, or the business that rents that property.
This is more of the say that people have, whether they're business owners, building owners, you know, it's nice to have a say, it's nice to have a little, you know, committee, but realistically, I mean, I don't,
I think everybody has to plant that in their own head.
yeah.
Because when I think, so I can think of 2 examples where an advisory group for a state department, Montana, a department in the state of Montana, formed an advisory group. They went through the whole thing. Their advice was honored in a way that ended up with policy being put in place and law. I can think of one here in Missoula several years ago where there was an advisory group put together, and it had to do with, what was in the papers, like I said, it had to do with buses. It was a long time ago, and bus routes. And the group made a pretty solid recommendation, and the people making the decision said, no, we're gonna do it our way anyway. Well, guess how those people felt? They were gagging on cynicism at the end, because why did they put their time in? But I cannot in any way say that the city would listen exactly. But if the city has 15 people together of different interests, and you come in and say, we would recommend this together, and we think we took care of each of these interests, for the city then to say, well, screw you guys, who cares? I think that's a very negative thing about engagement. I think engagement is one of those words that, remember what Jeremy said earlier, that people are real cynical about engagement now, they're disappointed, we live in the whole world right now. Well, all we can say about this is the interests at the table have an opportunity to learn about what's going on with other people and how do you make the best recommendation you can, knowing that you have no decision authority. That's what it looks like.
Well, I think that's a good point that's been made, and quite frankly, this whole process has felt that way so far, so that's not a great
Yeah.
start. But I would like to suggest that this isn't probably the best solution in terms of advice, I guess. I would offer up a sort of hybrid model, perhaps.
Let's hear it.
So for example, there's no way, I have a restaurant downtown, there's no
Right.
way that I'm gonna represent a retail store downtown. Right, so just that one category has probably 10 other categories in it, right, in terms
Yep.
of types of businesses
Yep.
that are downtown. And then on top of that, you got 18 categories on there, right? So the idea that there's 14 or 15 people that are gonna represent everybody well, that's just not possible, right? And then on top of that, the commitment of going 2 or 3 years is gonna weed a ton of people out, right? Like Nick and I, for example, probably no way that we'll be on that committee. I don't think we can probably commit to something like that. I'm already on, symphony boards and other boards and county.
So maybe you're not the best person to be on the committee.
Well, I'm just saying that those have been engaged in this process so far, probably have a hard time committing 2 or 3
Yeah,
years of
yeah.
small group committees, but my larger concern is that the idea that we would hand this off to any small group as an advisory board or committee is concerning, without us then having a possibility of seeing what the heck is gonna happen here, which has really been one of the main points of contention this whole time, is what exactly is going to happen, right? Well, we don't know how to weigh in until there are details, right? And so along the way, it would be nice to at least have more meetings like this, where there are actual details, so that we can all weigh in, you know, and not just have it handed off to the small advisory committee over the next 2 or 3 years.
So, my mother's throat in the morning. What I heard from you sort of helps lay out the process. And rather than a hybrid, I think you just gave parts of it. There would be no reason that you would not have meetings like this to help people come along. So, when the city looked at these, we have certain categories on here, certain targets, that wouldn't make any sense to have people at the table. Because you're not gonna be dealing perhaps with issues that could happen, or issues related to parking, or specific things to an individual business. And so, some of those groups would be, for example, let's talk about this one, local indigenous history and values. We think about the bridge. So there may be a native person that would be there, but the native person wouldn't be there to lobby for their interests. They would be there to try to think about and help people understand why they would like their values at least thought about within this, okay? The business about you can't possibly, as a restaurant owner, also represent the other 15 or 16 kinds of businesses downtown. Think about all the galleries, all those kinds of things. So this may not be one interest, but there might be somebody that represents one of those other businesses, but also owns piece of property down there. So the group doesn't come together as 15 elite people who get to sort of advise the city. This is a think tank that will look at specific pieces, not the kind of group growth that's occurred before, but specific pieces, and give advice back on it. I also think that running a set of mailboxes for each person there, let's say Nick, you happen to volunteer to be able to, you apply and you're selected here. I'm also gonna ask each one of the people if they would run a set of about 5 mailboxes, meaning you identify 5 or so people on the outside, could be your barber, an employee, your partner, your neighbor, I don't care who it is, but people that don't think exactly like you do, but people that might fill into some of those niches that you're talking about. So every time the group meets, you go out and you have a question and you ask those 5 people, what do you think about this? So when you come back to the table, you bring their comments as well. So let's say there's 10 people on the advisory group, you each talk to 5 people. Now you got 50 thoughts at the table. So we're trying to figure out a way that those would come in as well. The general public engagement meetings that would happen, my experience is that advisory group members, they don't mind going to those and talking to people about it. So this is not a perfect process. And I think your comments are really helpful because this has to be laid out in a way that there's some sense of value about the mutual kinds of advice that comes on a specific part of the project from a group of people. But they wouldn't forward those recommendations until first they went out and talked their mailboxes and see if that is at all useful.
Jenny,
Please.
can I add something?
Can I take that first?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask a
Okay.
clarifying.
Okay, go ahead.
So I just wanted to clarify that the advisory committee is not intended to replace that larger public process. So we'll still have opportunities for the general public to weigh in. And then I think to your point, Scott, I think we'll have opportunities for specific focus groups to meet and talk about those specific issues.
Ah.
Different businesses, trucks and deliveries, I think there's all these subcategories where we need to drill down a little bit further. And I think the ask there wouldn't be, we need you for 3 years, 8 times a year. But at specific points in the project, we're gonna need to circle back and say, all right, this is specifically about how we deal with
Yeah.
retail business in downtown.
And the advisory group might say, we can't do this yet. We need to hear, we need to do that. We need to collect the information from that specific group whatever. So the advisory committee is not about decision-making as it is helping guide the process in the information. And in the end, hopefully, out of an advisory group, you might get 5, over a 2-year period, 5 solid pieces of advice that made the project better than it was gonna be. But I'm gonna, please, go ahead.
Well, I think actually Jeremy responded, because I was remembering a couple slides ago where it seemed like this was just additional to already existing outreach public processes.
Yeah.
I just added another layer of trying to understand what we all need out of it, so I was just clarifying that, so is that.
And I think that's really helpful to think about, because what this process does in a way is it focuses rather than continues sort of the wide group role. It focuses. And the advisory group has a lot, the power it does have is saying to the city and the facilitator, you know, this isn't working, we need to do this instead. Because that's who's in charge. A facilitator for that kind of group does nothing but process management, design and process management. So, you guys have already helped in thinking about what should this look like in the long term. There was another hand. No?
Well, along these lines, who is
Because I'm
the,
gonna take this comment first. Go ahead, please.
I don't know if you want this feedback, but there's 2 categories that I think would be very helpful to this list. One would be community health, a very health focused, health of people, health of community, health of society. The other would be sustainability/climate, which is, and both of those seem to be very important lenses for the city of Missoula.
So when we met the other day, over the last couple of weeks, talking about those interests, actually, we did find sustainability and climate missing from this. Not that other people wouldn't care about that, but do we need a specific focus to it? And the other one you're saying is community health. And Macy, I'm assuming somebody's writing those down. So, absolutely, this isn't absolute. This is just to help you think about, you know, do you want to be part of this? Would it be any fun? Would you like it? You know, can we get them to buy coffee? I mean, but it's serious work. Whether you're working on wolves or grizzly bears or you're going to put bison on the Charlie Russell, this is about what the heck is that project going to look like and how is it going to affect me? That's the bottom line. You were next.
well, I was just gonna
And
ask,
then I'm coming.
who then, so the advisory committee recommends such and such to who? Like, who is the actual decision maker on this process?
Do you remember that list that
Yeah,
Jeremy had up here?
a whole bunch of cooks in the kitchen, but who's actually making the decisions is the question.
I
Is it
think
Jeremy?
I think that's the question of the day in most things.
So,
Well, seriously, there's no answer to that?
No,
no,
I'm
that's,
teasing you. But
So-
think again about that. Go ahead.
so the majority of project level decision-making happens at the staff level. It is department heads that ultimately are responsible to make decisions. We will always consult with the mayor on things that have larger impacts. You know, the mayor doesn't necessarily know want to know what kind of pavement we're gonna use, but when we get into what the lane width's gonna look like, or what's the treatment for bikes, it's gonna bubble up to the mayor. So ultimately, the mayor directs staff, directs me on critical issues. And then at the higher levels, we have to get approval from city council to fund and contract for the project. And same with MDT, the Transportation Commission also ultimately has to say, yes, go ahead with this project. At the very top, we got federal highways, and we have a grant that we spelled out some specific goals, some specific things we're gonna do. There's gonna be some sideboards on what that grant can and cannot fund. Does that help?
Well, but ultimately then are you bringing the final details to the mayor and the city council, who understandably are gonna trust your decision-making,
Yes.
right? And so, to the largest extent possible, I would say you are kind of the ultimate decision maker. Is that fair statement?
Yeah, with a group of other department heads, so
Yeah.
redevelopment agency, parks department,
Okay.
parking, we all have a different stake in the project. I mean, so like the train wreck that can happen on a project like this is that you go through all the work and you get to city council and then they don't vote to approve your contract, right? You never want to be there. So I have to keep the mayor and city council informed of the project, and they have to have trust and confidence that it has had good public involvement, good outreach. And so that process of providing input through an advisory committee, like Jenny said, if you've got 15 people that are all saying this is an important piece of the project, and we've all come to agreement or as close to agreement as you can on on what should happen, it's gonna be very hard for us to do something different.
So that's what I meant about, it's really hard to say.
No, I
in the
get
end,
it. I
you
mean,
know.
part
I
of the
got
problem
one,
with our
two.
country right now is that we're trying to rule by majority, and that's a tough thing to do, right? It causes the level of frustration that we have right now.
Yeah,
To think that just simply because it's the majority that it's the right thing to do.
Right.
thank you. 1, 2.
Who will go through the people that apply? Who's gonna go through the applications and make a decision on who gets to participate?
I'm pointing at him because he's going to answer that. I got no power here. The only power I have is once we set ground rules in the process and process agreements, then I'll enforce them. That's the only power I have, but selection and that business goes to them.
Well, I could see it being easy to look at the people that apply and go, well, this guy's friendly, this guy's not, let's lean towards this guy or something. You know, and then what if people like Nick and Scott are too busy to participate and we don't have people that apply that would represent their interests? I guess that's my question.
Well, so we will seek out folks to make sure that we cover all of these different interests. If we don't get applications, we will reach out and ask people, please, twist some arms, can you
Name the
please
heck out of
consider
it.
this or help me find somebody? So I think with Ginny's help, we're gonna design this application that folks that are interested can fill out. And our criteria is going to be, it's not whether you're nice or not, it's whether, can you sit down?
I'm better with people who aren't nice.
I hope you'll be nice, but really, it's can we sit down at a table and have a civil dialogue and work toward collaborative and useful solutions for all the different interests, right? So if it's somebody who's just going to be disruptive, I'm not interested in having that person on the committee. But somebody that will sit down and work honestly for their interest and the interest of the other at the table, that's what we're looking for. And the way I see this working is this leadership team will review the applications, we'll make a recommendation for the committee to the mayor. Mayor will ultimately give us the thumbs up on whether or not that is the right mix. So, like Jenny said, there's no perfect way to do this, but I think we just have to go into it with good transparency and understanding how we form a committee that represents all of the different interests and not weight the committee, toward one side or the other, so that everybody feels like they have a good representative group.
Yeah, so you mentioned that some people have been involved for like 2 decades now, so I might just be coming without that context, but I am curious. It sounds like a lot has been talked about for a long time. Decisions have been, presumably some plan was put together to get this grant approved, and I'm curious, everything we've been talking about so far kind of sounds to me like the things I would imagine talking about in 2004. But are there things that have already been decided on? Is there sort of what does that grant approval require? Are there things that are kind of foundational, not going to budge, this is what we're all already agreed to, and then these are details, and what are so all these things we're talking about, we're arguing, coming together for common ground, exactly are those kinds of things that are still on the table? Is it lane width? Is it number of bike lanes? Is it how many parking spaces we remove? Will we definitely remove a certain amount? I'm just curious where we are in that process.
Yeah, thanks, that's a great question. So the grant, those 4 big goals that I put up earlier, we laid that out in the grant. So these are our goals. It's about safety, it's about access and circulation, about economic health in the downtown, revitalizing, streetscape. Within that, we've said we're gonna convert Front and Main back to 2-way traffic. We're going to provide bicycle facilities for the length of Higgins. We're going to make ADA connections down to the river, and we're going to do signal timing, signal optimization. So those are our sideboards. We won't be able to change that and still use this grant money. But within that, there's still a lot of questions about how do you actually do it? How do you actually create the best combination of design elements to achieve those goals? So an honest answer to your question is everything's not on the table, but there are still enough pieces of the project that we can navigate and make the project better for the different interests.
Gotcha, okay.
That sort of goes to the how rather than the if.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for me if I was at another general people meeting to know what are we actually willing to, what are the limits, basically? If we went to each interest, what would it be that perfect? And what are we actually talking about in terms of within the requirements that for this, to use this grant money? Where can we push this one direction or the other?
Sure.
So that I know what I can even weigh in on, feel strongly about.
So that's probably really important for the advisory group too.
Yeah,
That
thanks
when
for
you
that.
start, you take all that information and lay it out, so we know what we're doing.
Yeah, so I think that when we form the application for the advisory committee, it will also have a bit of a charter to go with it, saying this is what we're asking the committee to do, and these are the sideboards that we're working with. So you'll have a good idea of where we're starting. I think you make another really good point, which is everybody's not at the same place with this project. So there are people that have been involved for 20 years, and there are people involved for 3 months. And so we have to recognize that there's a coming together on just where are we at and how do we start at the same point.
You had your hand up.
Yeah, who will be the facilitator for the group? You will? Will there
Unless
be,
they can be or I die. You know, remember, we're talking about long periods of time.
will the city be involved in those discussions, or will it just be?
So,
You-
that, great question. So what often happens with this, and I think the city's thinking this would be a good idea, there would be a technical group that might be 2 people who would always be there. But they're sitting in the back, and they don't participate in the discussion unless the advisory group asks them for information. They don't give advice, they don't say, no, you can't, but if something's absolutely wrong or illegal, they would say so. If you're talking about a specific piece of the project, there might be 2 people there in sort of an ad hoc way. But they would be these folks that would sit in the back, and they would give information when asked, but they would not have influence over the group. If there was a decision maker in the group from some organization up here, then that person would say in the beginning, I have decision authority here to say I could buy into a recommendation or not. Or they might say, I have to go back and talk to these other people, not just the mailbox, but I have to talk, say an association, I have to talk to my members, etc. So this is one of these kind of things. But the city will not have input in a way that says this is what you ought to do. Only information and explanation. Was there one here before? There you are. Thank you. I'm coming. Go ahead.
Is there some reason at this point that you can't identify? I think the only thing on that flow chart, unless Gianforti doesn't get reelected, is maybe who might be our mayor. Can you tell us who the project leadership team is at this point in time?
Jeremy.
Is anyone going to be dealing with the Chamber of Commerce or the downtown?
No, so the project leadership team is myself, Donna Gockler, who's the Parks Department Director, Ellen Buchanan, who's the Director for the Redevelopment Agency, and the one person that we don't know yet is who will be our new Parking Commissioner, or Parking Director. So Tiffany Brander is currently the
Can
our
that change?
interim.
Can the leadership team change in this process?
The mix of people or the
On the leadership?
actual people
Will
involved?
that be on the engagement? I mean, I would maybe apply for this, but if I had to go up against Linda McCarthy telling me what's good for downtown, I might not apply. So it seems like you may have already identified that. And if that could change, then some other people could get involved.
So
in that.
would you mind waiting a minute?
I mean, we're at the very bottom.
So when
We've
you,
got a long gauntlet to
I
get
know.
through to the top.
well, I like to think of this as sort of servant leadership. You know, you got power that's going upstairs. In the end, there are decision makers who change their minds because of the advice of the advisory group. But but I want to ask you, and you said, I might not apply if I have to go up against so-and-so. Tell me why.
Because I've been involved longer than 20 years. I've been involved 40 years downtown.
Why wouldn't you apply to be on the advisory?
Because I've been involved before and I know how.
Waste your time.
Can be a feel good
Yeah.
minute. I was involved in the redesign of North Higgins for years and years and years. And the things that I suggested, like irrigation for trees and things like that, just
Right out the window.
disappeared.
Okay,
Didn't
so-
even come up, so I'm not gonna waste my time. I've got it, but I'm not gonna waste it.
So I'm not trying to encourage.
Scott's
And-
question,
and-
can you put that up on the Engage Missoula application? Do you
Oh,
let- So there is where we would get that changed.
Yeah, I think.
Could.
I think a lot of businesses would like to see at least one additional, maybe an elected official or somebody other than the current group that has been running the show for the length of this project. I think that's the big concern, and I share it. I think the project leadership team is too narrow, and I don't think it has good representation of it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm assuming you're making those notes.
To kind of go more to what he was asking, are there decisions that have been made that just will not change? Like, for example, Higgins being narrowed down to one lane each direction with the left turn lane. Has that decision been made? Are there definitely going to be protected bicycle lanes rather than next to the vehicle traffic? I guess that's my, and at one time, there was indication that they would consider doing a test run before doing changes that couldn't be undone. Is stuff like that still on the table, or have decisions been made to where that's not gonna, there are firm decisions have been made, I guess, that's my
Yeah, so I think the pilot project idea is something we still want to kick around. I think it's something we could still consider, and that we'd thought about, if we don't get the grant, maybe we'll do a pilot, but I think even with the grant, we should talk about what would make sense to do a demonstration of this concept and test it. As far as those specific design decisions, the grant is, we have flexibility in the grant, but what it says is we're going to have a complete street facility. We need to accommodate all the different users, and we're going to prioritize safety. And so I think when we look at Higgins, we're gonna start out with our concept, which is the 3-lane concept with protected bikeways, and we're gonna evaluate, is that the right design? Does that meet all of our requirements? And unless we come up with something different that still meets all of those things, it still does all of those things, that's where we're gonna start. So it's not locked in, but that is the track we're on.
So those are exactly the kinds of things that an advisory group might be looking at. And so I think also when you say this is done and this isn't, this is still loose, this isn't, that's impossible to say everything this morning. But it is a really good question about what are the kinds of things that an advisory group would be looking at as you go through the process. phasing might be one. I mean, that just different kinds of things like that. So we told you we would only keep you, people requested an early morning meeting so that it didn't interfere a lot with your day. So I'm gonna take a couple more questions, and then I'm gonna give you one last sort of semi-sappy request that there are people in this room, or you know people who might be good at a table where people have discussion about sometimes disparate and opposing and sometimes complementary interests in how something gets done. And that it would be a civil kind of discussion because of ground rules. It would be a mutuality sort of climate because I'm not going to lobby for my exact thing until I know how it would affect what you want to have happen. And then I might give it a second thought. We might find mitigation things. But they will be, this is not about continuing to talk about whether we're going to do the project. This is about taking absolute pieces when the city can get to them, when the grant is done, that kind of business, and working on that. You might spend 2 or 3 meetings working on a certain kind of thing. So I'm going to take the last couple questions, and there was one, please. Please, in 2, can I go to you next, please?
So, basically along the lines of what Nick had proposed with the Lowen building, which is some way to scratch this a bit more and pilot. I do realize it's going full implementation and it's going to be tried. Is there going to be any due process as if this is data's coming in, this is not working, and we're seeing bad traffic flows, businesses are suffering? Is there a way, much like the decision to go to war, a country unilaterally decides, not the citizens, but the higher ups, we're going to go to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, 7,700 dead Americans and over 500,000 dead Afghans and Iraqis, civilians, and then at some point the country decides this isn't working out, right? So they pull back and you have that terrible loss, but it's sort of irreversible, they are lives. This isn't livelihoods.
This is like monitoring or
Yeah.
pre-monitoring.
Yeah,
to
like
see if it's
the
working.
decision to go and do something,
Yeah.
sometimes there's no proper mechanism to stop this.
Yeah.
There probably was good data in Afghanistan and Iraq that, hey, this is not gonna work out, we're already incurring losses and there's too many civilian deaths. Could we stop this at an early stage before we incur more loss?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very powerful example you gave. We're not hopefully dealing with life or death like that in war,
For
but
business owners,
But for-
it's
That's right.
yeah, I get it.
By
I
the
mean,
way, that just helped us to understand the interest. When you said, for business owners, it is like
It
that.
is, or-
That's why interest-based is so critical.
so there are some things, if we're going to do a project here, right? So there are going to be things that are going to be hard to undo. And so we want to make the best possible decisions. We want to go forward with confidence that we are making the best possible decisions before we do those things that are going to be hard to reverse. The way we get there is with this kind of input.
But like, once it's in place and say it's running just fine, and everything seems to be working fine, and then maybe some data's coming in, like people parking is off downtown, attendance is low, whether it's for events, restaurants, gallery owners, retailers, and the numbers are coming off. Outside precluding any kind of recession or thing that would affect that, it's hard data to collect because of the changing years of economy. But overall, if you looked at like, hey, our downtown is heading in the direction of Portland, which we have customers coming all the time from Portland, they say they don't even go downtown. They've done this kind of thing in Portland. And they don't even go downtown. It's just occupied by a bunch of homeless. Looks real pretty, but like, you know, there's blood on the street.
So what I would say first is we have to define what success looks like. We want to, before we do this, we want to have a very clear understanding of what is it that we're trying to accomplish and what is success, how do we measure it when we're done?
Yeah.
Because not everybody's going to have the same opinion of that, and that, like I said, some of these things are going to be hard to undo, and it may be 20 years before we come back and do another project, so.
I have a clear memory of President George W. Bush getting up on an aircraft carrier saying, it's been a success. My dad being really like pro-Bush and like pro that success, I was like, there's gonna be a lot of dead Americans success is a funny thing, because just because one person says it's successful, maybe you're marginalizing the native group or the homeless group, or maybe just the point of a downtown, you know, to do business and to have a nice place to
So what
find-
you've done is make the point for interest base.
Yeah.
Because you want to make sure that whatever you're recommending isn't violating this interest in such a way. So one of the tools with the group is to look at unintended consequences ahead of time.
Yeah.
You're saying, will there be an evaluating, a monitoring strategy somehow that we'll be looking at, how can we stop before we go over the cliff?
Well, no,
And-
it's gonna be done, like, you're gonna do the project, it's gonna go, much like a war, it just will go, and then you're gonna see how it plays out. Will there be unacceptable losses on both, you know, personnel and civilian side, or is there gonna be a success to future and democracy, or whatever your goal is?
So this group, stepping aside from the analogy, this
Yes.
group will do things like, if we're making this recommendation, what might be the unintended consequences that we didn't think about? That if we go ahead with the project, this could be something that could happen. I'm gonna just say that we will do what we can to look ahead, but other than what, thanks for coming.
Yep.
See ya.
Thank you.
Apply, so I think, I'm gonna try to move on to the other questions, but I think what I wanna make sure I'm hearing you say is that it's helpful to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences, first of all. Second, we need to
Oversight.
monitor and evaluate and do some oversight. And if we have really blown it, we need to think about that, and maybe there needs to be some backing up strategy.
Because it's never
Okay.
too late, it's never too late.
Thank you, that's helpful. Go ahead.
I just want to say, well, thanks for holding the session this morning, and apropos of your point as well here. I haven't worked on it for 40 years, but for 16, and I really encourage everybody at this point to read the proposal that went to the federal government, the Engage Missoula site, data, comparables, other communities, especially ones that are more comparable than Portland in terms of the size of the central business district, and traffic flows, and pedestrian and bike flows. There's just so much there already that lays out the broad contours of the project, what we're trying to accomplish, and the numbers. There are already a lot of things in there related to economic health, business health, and traffic flows. So, especially if you are planning to apply for it, I just look at that, because you will learn a lot, you know, and you will catch up to all of us that have been working on this for many years. And staff, along with many people on council and everything, have done an amazing job putting all this together to get to this point. So please, just look at that, because if you do that, then it's going to answer a lot of questions and at least help you formulate the other questions and, you know, metrics and possibly unintended consequences that you're looking for. So I just say.
You're laying out the homework.
It's there.
This is the homework for the advisory
Please read it
group.
first before you just, you know, make any judgments.
Thank you.
I have one
I'm
last-
gonna take 3 more questions, and then I'm gonna, like I said, say a few words to beg you to apply this. Go ahead.
It's my last question, I promise. Have they defined how many parking spaces will be lost on the Higgins, or the Main Street, Front Street conversion?
No,
When will that happen?
soon. When we're able to really get this design rolling, and yeah, so we have work to do yet.
So you also just help think about the advisory group. One of the exercises that the group does is, within this space, what are the important questions that need to be answered? We don't know the answer yet, but what are the important questions? So we can start to collect that information. So thank you. Annie, please.
I just want to encourage that this is a life and death, not just for livelihood, that's important, but we lose people on our streets, whether they're walking, biking, driving, motorcycles, and we can and should strive to do that.
And so in the development of mutuality at the advisory group table, we would hope that at least I've given it a second thought to consider that life and death might be different things to them. So up here it says 11 to 15 people. You know, I've done grizzly bears with 23. The number is not the single most important criteria. It's that the interests are represented. If you have 35 people, it doesn't work. If you have 7 or 8 people, it doesn't work. But the city would not say, well, we're at 15, so we can't add any more. That's not the important point here, is that people who apply, that there's an adequate list that would represent, that could come to the table and honestly talk about the interests of whatever you bring, and maybe 2 or 3 others as well. So I'm really, it's actually kind of an interesting process, and you learn a lot about each other and your fellow citizens, but your interests don't get taken away from you. If it's in your interest, it belongs to you, nobody else. We can't say, well, that's stupid, you shouldn't have that interest. Doesn't matter. The business of having trees irrigated, if that's your interest, we're gonna try to sort that out and figure out how that can be done. Even though these other things we have to think about as well. So I'm just using you there, I'm sorry. So did you have your hand up?
I do have
You yeah, you were going, yeah.
Well, I guess my question is like, how are you going to ensure that all of these interests are represented, like outside of who's in this room right now? Like, is there more advertising of this advisory committee needs people, or like, how is that gonna work?
Yeah, we'll do a public call for applications, we'll do a press release, and we'll get it out on our websites and let people know that this opportunity is coming up and explain what we're looking for, so that's a good question.
Or if there's someone in the room that says, I can't do it, I don't have time, then encourage 2 or 3 people that you know would give the kind of representation you want at the table. And that goes to mailboxes.
Yep.
So, I'm hoping, I'm sure there's cynicism in the room about it. I'm sure there's people who are sick and tired of this. I'm sure that there are people who still feel very lobbyish about getting their own things done. And I'll tell you, you take a risk when you're going to be in the group, because to some degree, the only way you give your power away is trying to understand not the feelings of the other people, but why it's life and death to you. And so, should I just be the winner here? Or are we trying to make this the best project it can be for Missoula? And that means you take your hat off in terms of however, I would never let you let go of your interest. If you're letting go of your interest, then we'll have an out loud talk in front of the rest of the group about how come you're giving your power away.
Okay.
So, thank you for coming this morning. I'm going to ask him to say goodbye.
Yeah, I gotta make just a couple of final plugs here. So there's a handout by the door here. Pick this up. There's a QR code you can scan to connect to the Engage page if that's easier for you. This is the way to stay involved. So if you wrote your name down on the list today, we'll make sure that you're on the mailing list and get connected with the Engage Missoula page. So that's how we're going to really push information out. So again, thank you all for being here. I want to just do a quick plug for the parking study. This is what's going on right now with the parking study, is they are in their final drafts of the recommendations. It's currently being reviewed by the Parking Commission and their advisory committees coming up in a week or so. And then late November, we'll have that final plan, and that'll be available for public comment on the Engage page. So there's a separate Engage Missoula page for the parking study, so if you're interested in parking, be sure to check that out.